Welcome to this tutorial for a Paper 1 Question 4 session, which is all about the critical evaluation of a text. I have done a couple of these already, and I will put the links to those in the description for this video. But this is out of 20 marks, and I'm going to be using the AQA Hartop paper for this, which was from June 2019. The reason why we have a picture of some chrysanthemums there is because those of you who might have done this already for a mock paper will know that this was a central symbol in this extract in order to assess a particular character and that character's relationship with his family, really. So that's the reason why there's a picture there. So the aims of this video, there are 4 of them. I'm going to start by reminding you of what you need to do for this question 4, and what the examiner is looking for. I'm going to then show you the question that this video is all about and remind you about what we need to take away from that question in order to make sure we are writing the response effectively. We are going to then look at the extract itself, and we are going to analyse it and evaluate it in terms of what we might want to talk about in relation to this task. And towards the end of this session, I'm going to be showing you 4 example answers, and we're going to look at them in terms of the mark scheme, and we're going to think about what they got out of 20. So this is a 20 marker. So it is quite a big question actually in terms of marks, particularly for the reading section of paper 1. So what do we already know about this question, or what do we need to know for this question? It's 20 marks, which means we're spending about 20 minutes on it, and we need to write at least 2 paragraphs. This is designed to be a bit of a mini essay because you're bringing together your language knowledge, your structure knowledge, and you are putting it all together in order to answer a particular question that has a particular focus in it. It's always a good idea to start your response with saying you strongly agree or partly agree with the task, but never disagree, because the task itself will be worded in a way where there is more evidence usually than not to agree with it. The task itself will be worded as a quotation which somebody has said. It's usually a student, and in that quotation there will be a particular focus. So you must in that task find the key words and I suppose repeat them or use synonyms for them throughout the whole response, and that shows the examiner that you are answering the question and not going off on a tangent, which can be quite easy to do with English. In order to get high up into the mark scheme, you need to be able to draw on your knowledge of writers' methods, which is a fancy way of saying language and structure. So you still need to draw on your your language effects and things, language techniques, but in a less perhaps focused way than you would have done for a language question. You need to continue to quote from the text, and importantly, in order to expand on your ideas, you need to ask yourself why. So you have a particular task, a particular focus of the task. You need to ask yourself, why does the evidence you have picked show that that task is accurate, that quote is accurate in terms of the text? A way to do that is you can put yourself in the shoes of the character, and you could think about how you would react if you were in the character's shoes, because chances are you would react in the same way perhaps. And because this is an evaluation question, it's always good to use words like conveys and suggests and foregrounds and so on, because that is really about the effects on readers and also about evaluating the writer's craft. So that's what we know already. I go into more detail with those things in the first video I did for question 4, and again I'll put the link for that in the description below. So this is the task that we're going to be looking at for the rest of this video, and what I've done in previous videos is I've highlighted and annotated why the examiner tells you this information, because they tell you it for a reason. It's to help steer you towards the correct response, really. So the first thing that's important is to pay attention to the line numbers. So this is a question which will always be about the end of the extract. So this is from line 34 to the end. You need to make sure that you keep to that section. And then we have the important bit, because this is the actual task itself. A student said this part of the story where Alice is sent back along the road to find what has fallen from the roof and returns with the chrysanthemums shows how hard and cruel Hartop is, so that all of our sympathy is with Alice. Okay, so the bits that I've highlighted there, there's 3 sections there really. Hartop is the father, Alice is the daughter. And to give you some context, the mother, father and daughter are travelling in a van, and Hartop makes a living by selling produce, which includes flowers. So chrysanthemums are a type of flower, and he might sell other produce like vegetables. And in this extract, they're driving through, I think it's night time, and basically a box of chrysanthemums falls off the roof of the car onto the road, and he basically tells Alice to get out and get them, and it's dark. So that's really what happens, and she complies, and she goes and gets the flowers, and she brings them back, and then they have a bit of a discussion back in the car again. So the key things that we've got to look out for then is Hartop, the father figure, being portrayed as strict, as cruel, as uncaring, or hard. And also another bit of the key focus there is the effect that this has on how we see Alice. So whether or not we see her as a sympathetic character because she's having to put up with her father's anger all the time. Then we get to what extent do you agree, and that's prompting you to obviously evaluate the text, give your opinion, because the examiner wants to know what you think. And then you get the bullet points. The first bullet point is we need to basically ask ourselves whether Alice is treated cruelly or not by her father. The second and third bullet point always remains the same, really. So evaluate how the writer creates sympathy for Alice. So evaluate the how bit stays the same, reminding ourselves that we need to talk about writers' methods. And the final bullet point, again, reminding you to talk about, reminding you to include quotes in your response, so evidence, the bits that you highlight, which we're going to do next. 20 marks, 20 minutes, at least 2 paragraphs in this mini kind of essay. So in summary then, we need all of the evidence that we find must be after line 34, and it must be to do with proving that her father figure is cruel or angry. It's to do with proving that Alice is fed up, proving that we have sympathy for her because of the way her father is treating her. Or, even if we're not going to agree fully with that, because there might be reasons why Hartop is behaving the way he is, we might say we can understand why somebody might think that he's like this, but there might be a good reason for it, in which case you kind of partly agree, maybe, with this response. So here is the extract. I'm going to read through it, at least the part of the extract that we need for this question. And then what we'll do is we'll look through this extract and find the evidence. So what you might want to do as you watch this video is to have a highlighter in hand or to have a pen ready and to jot down quotes that you think you would want to use, remember, to prove that Hartop could be seen as a cruel, hard, strict father figure. Or, alternatively, to find evidence that would prove that Alice is kind of a little bit fed up, or we see her sympathetically because she's having to put up with her father's anger, perhaps. So Hartop leaned across his wife and shouted, Go back a bit and see what it was." The woman moved to protest, but Hartop was already speaking again. "Something dropped. We'll stop at Drake's turn. You'll catch up. I know something dropped." He let in the clutch as he was speaking, and the van began to move away. Soon, to Alice, it seemed to be moving very rapidly. In the rain and the darkness, all she could see was the tail lights smoothly receding. She watched it for a moment and then began to walk back along the road. The wind was behind her, but repeatedly it seemed to veer and smash her, with the rain full in the face. She walked without hurrying. She seemed to accept the journey as she accepted the rain and her father's words, quite stoically. She walked in the middle of the road, looking directly ahead, as though she had had a long journey before her. She could see nothing. And then, after a time, she stumbled against something in the road. She stooped and picked up a bunch of pink chrysanthemums, and then began to walk back with them along the road. Before very long she could see the red tail light of the van again. It was stationary. She could also see the lights of the houses, little squares of yellow which the recurrent rain on her lashes transformed into sudden stars. When she reached the van, Mrs. Hartop said, "What was it?" "Only a bunch of chrysanthemums." Hartop himself appeared at the very moment she was speaking. "Only," he said. "Only? What do you mean by only, eh?" Alice stood mute. Then Hartop raised his voice. "Well, don't stand there. Do something. Go on. Go on. Go and see who wants a bunch of chrysanthemums. Move yourself." Alice obeyed at once. She picked up the flowers, walked away, and vanished, all without a word. So, that is the section of the extract we need to use. So what you can do is you can go back, or you can pause the video now to look back at that first section, and either, if you've got the extract in front of you, highlight the bits that you want to use, or pause this video and jot down some quotes, and then do the same maybe with this little conversation they have at the end. But remember, what we are looking for, if I just go back to the task, is we're looking to prove that Hartop, by the way that he speaks to her, or by what he does, can be considered as cruel or strict, as unsympathetic. And what we can also look for is any evidence that proves that Alice has had enough of it, or Alice is we feel sympathy for Alice because of the way she's been spoken to by her father. What you might also want to do is find evidence to prove that maybe Hartop has a right to be angry. Maybe he has things on his mind that Alice does not, and therefore for him these chrysanthemums are very important for him, and that's the reason why maybe he is acting in this way. So first step, we need to actually find the evidence. So you can pause this video now and do that. Okay, so as I said, there are 3 steps to this process. First, you need to find the evidence to prove that Hartop perhaps can be seen as cruel and treats Alice badly. Your evidence can also be to do with finding that we have sympathy for Alice in her response to her father. But now that you have highlighted those quotes, and remember it's 20 minutes, so you can't highlight everything. You've got to be very selective. Look at what you've highlighted and perhaps consider what significant methods you can see in those bits that you've highlighted. So there might be particular use of adjectives, there might be a simile, there might be a particular sentence type, and so on. So have a look at if there's any particular methods that you could tie in to the bits that you've already highlighted. Okay, so to go through this extract, you can see here that I've been very, very selective in what I've highlighted because I know that it's only 20 minutes. There's only so much that I can do. And because it's important for me to expand on these in terms of as to the why and the how for this question, I can't just list, several quotes and then analyze them in terms of language devices. I've got to say why these bits that I've highlighted in pink prove that Hartop can be seen as angry or domineering or strict, or why we might have sympathy for Alice. So the first thing I've talked of there is that sentence leaned across his wife and shouted. So the verbs leaned and shouted. Obviously, when somebody leans into your personal space, they could be seen as quite strict or quite domineering or quite, in your face. So that could be something that you could talk about there. I've talked about when Alice gets out of the van into the rain, how the pathetic fallacy, how the weather of the rain, the verb there, smash, almost the rain kind of seemed to smash her. So we might have sympathy for Alice because she's gone out of the relative comfort of the van into the elements. Remember, Hartop hasn't chosen to get out of the van himself. He's told to get his daughter out of the van. He's told his daughter to get out of the van. And no matter what the weather conditions were, he's told her to get out. So again, we might have sympathy for Alice. And it seems that the weather here is used to mirror perhaps kind of the fragmented or fractured relationship between Hartop and his daughter in this moment. The weather kind of mirrors the bombardment of his anger, perhaps, or his kind of orders. There's a bit there that I could have highlighted, I suppose. She walked without hurrying. She seemed to accept the journey as she accepted the rain, her father's words on line 43. So I haven't highlighted that, but I could perhaps highlight that with the repetition of the word accept. She seemed to just accept this. She seemed to walk without hurrying, as if her spirits are completely flat, maybe. So this might not be the first time that she's had to do as her father says. And then as we get into this conversation, there's lots of little tidbits here that you can talk about in this conversation. So she gets back into this van and she gets the chrysanthemums and she says to her mother, oh, it was only a bunch of flowers, it was nothing much. But Hartop hears this and he starts to bombard her with lots of interrogative sentences. So only, what do you mean by only, A? So there's 4 interrogative sentences there. So an interrogative sentence is a sentence that is designed to interrogate somebody, usually a question, designed to create a response. So the repetition of interrogative sentences there shows that he's maybe quite a, in-your-face character. He's really wanting some answers from her, but he's doing it in a very kind of threatening way or quite a demanding way. We're then told in a declarative sentence or a simple sentence, then Hartop raised his voice. So his tone of voice is also conveying his superiority in this van as they have this conversation. And then we have repetition of imperatives, so commands. Don't just stand there, do something, go on, move yourself. So again, he's very bossy. So the repetition of his imperative commands there in that dialogue shows that he is a very domineering character, and that would be evidence to prove that he is quite a cruel, perhaps, or quite strict father figure. And then we have the verb obeyed. So, he's told her, do this, do that, do this. She obeys, but she does it, without saying anything, without a word. So she's almost got used to this, maybe. So she's being bossed around, and she really has no power compared to him, perhaps. So again, that might prove that we have sympathy with her because of the way in which she is being talked to. So those are all bits of evidence that I could work with here, and what I've done as I've gone through, as you can see there, is I have thought about, well, what can I talk about in terms of methods in those bits that I've highlighted? What could I tie in terms of the writer's methods, the how, I suppose. How has the writer created Hartop and Alice in this way? So now that we've kind of planned the extract, we've interrogated the extract and found the evidence, we now need to think about this right-hand column, which is why do these quotes link to the question? So we need to now think about why does this present Hartop as cruel? And we also need to think about why does this mean we have sympathy for Alice? And the answers to these questions will be what you write in your response, which really help you to expand on your answer. The worst thing that you can do is to give very simple or short comments about why does this show Hartop as cruel. The more detail you go into, the higher your mark. So it's all about conveying a very sophisticated or perceptive opinion that you have in order to get into band 3, band 4. So I'm not going to go through all of these with you now, because you can obviously pause this video and look at these yourself and discuss this or plan this yourself. But if we look perhaps at that middle section, the repetition of interrogative sentences, what you could write is, well, how does he come across here? Why are the flowers more important to him than Alice, for example? So what you might want to say is, you could see him as very cruel, but actually, if he makes a living from selling produce, obviously what he sells is important to him. He doesn't just want to leave produce that he could make money from in the road and make a loss on them. He wants to sell them to make money, and it's the money that he's using to support his family. So traditionally, the father was the head of the household. They would be responsible for earning the money to support their family. So you could say that Hartop here is a traditional father figure in the sense that he is the breadwinner. He wants to make sure that he has a purpose, and for him that purpose is selling things to make money for the family. So you could actually argue the only reason why he cares about these flowers is because he wants to support his family, of which Alice is a part of. So he might be coming across as quite strict, but it's only because he knows that those flowers can be sold to make money. Going under the one underneath that, the repetition of imperatives, again asking yourself how he is presented here. What does it mean when somebody uses lots of commands? Why might Hartop be feeling this way? So, he clearly wants to sell these chrysanthemums. He clearly wants to make sure that there's money coming in. From memory, I don't think they have a lot of money, so that because the van is quite, I think, old, so they don't have a lot of money. So anything that they can sell is beneficial to them. They don't want to be wasting money by throwing away produce and things. So a reason why you might say that he is acting in this way is because he only cares about making money. He wants to make sure that his family is supported. You might also say that Alice doesn't really appreciate money. She doesn't appreciate selling things. She doesn't appreciate the efforts that you have to go to make money, perhaps. So again, you might want to see her as slightly less sympathetic. One of the things that you can also do is to think about these points for high-level thinking. So we've already said these really. How the weather mirrors Alice's onslaught from her father. So clearly the writer has deliberately chosen quite stormy weather, which could reflect metaphorically the barrage of commands and the barrage of interrogatives that she has to endure from her father. You could say that this is a depiction of quite a dysfunctional father and daughter relationship, and the dialogue or the direct speech, same thing, is used to convey this. So clearly the reason why the writer has decided to include the dialogue here is to give us an insight into the dynamic between them. You could also say that Alice has grown used to her father's anger and his bossiness. She seems to accept it as normal. Maybe it doesn't affect her at all. She just kind of says whatever and just gets on with it because it's easier than putting up a fuss. Maybe she's genuinely frightened of him. Who knows? That's for you to decide yourself. Maybe Alice sees the flowers as less important than her father because, as we just said, the father sees them as a way to make money. And maybe Alice doesn't appreciate that. So this might take away some of the cruelness of Hartop, and that means that you just partly agree with the task, perhaps. Maybe, yes, okay, he could be seen as coming across as cruel, but he's doing it for a reason. He just wants to make money and support his family, maybe. You could also say that Alice is a bit of a brat, maybe. You could say that, children are supposed to respect their parents. They're supposed to follow their parents' orders. So you could say, actually, we don't have much sympathy for Alice because she's doing what children should do, which is respecting their parents and doing what they say, perhaps. You can also think about synonyms for cruel. So in this particular slide, you can see here lots of synonyms that you can use instead of cruel. So one of the things that I said at the beginning is it's always a good idea to use the keywords in the task throughout your response, because that means that you are answering the question and the examiner can see that you're answering the question. You're not going off on a tangent. So we have a list of lovely words here which you can use in order to show that you are really focusing on Hartop and how he is presented. So words like monstrous and heinous and antagonistic, some lovely words in there that you can use to push up your evaluation. So I'm going to now, for the rest of this video, talk about the mark scheme and talk about peer assessing somebody else's work. So, as is always the case with the AQA specification, there are 4 levels for each question, and each of the levels will have adjectives which I've highlighted here in different colours, which basically summarise or label the standard of work that the student demonstrates to be in that level. So for band 4, it has to be perceptive and detailed, and so on. In order to be on track for a grade 4, so in order to be on track for a GCSE, you need to be either level 4, level 3, maybe the very top end of level 2. It's obviously hard to say because your grade is made up of all the other questions as well. But I often say to my students who are looking for just a grade 4 is to maybe you need to get half marks, and that makes it a lot more approachable to them, because they're not always looking for perfection. So if you do want just the grade 4, then I would suggest try and get about 10 out of 20, consistently half marks across all the questions. But obviously, if you have a higher prediction or you're after something higher, so 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9, then obviously you'll need to be in level 3 and level 4. So I'm going to show you 4 students or parts of their responses, and I'm going to then ask you to think about what level, what mark you would have given this particular response. I'm not going to tell you straight away. I'm going to keep it till the last slide. So you might want to pause after each of these students in order to have a go at guessing what you think they got. And this might be something interesting to do as a class as well, to kind of have a go at thinking about where these sit on the mark scheme. So I think student A was learning English as a second language. These aren't, I wasn't drunk when I was writing this. This was how it appeared on the page. So clearly the spelling and punctuation of this student, not particularly great, but that doesn't necessarily matter because this isn't a writing task, this is a reading task. So this is, I think, only part of student A's response. So they start by talking about, at the end of the extract, we see the harshness of Hartop towards his daughter Alice as she is sent out of the van in the rain and dark to look for the missing object. The writer emphasises the weather. In the rain and the darkness, all she could see was the tail light smoothly receding. Wind behind her, but repeatedly it seemed to veer and smash her. The imagery of the van moving away and personification of the wind hitting her shows the father left her in the dark all alone to look for the missing object, and he doesn't even know if there isn't a missing object. This makes the reader feel sympathy for Alice, as she is all alone in the dark and rain and she doesn't even know what she's looking for. So, think about here, I'm not going to tell you what this got at the minute, I want you to have a go at guessing. But think about, we've got personification, we've got imagery, we've got quotes. This student has talked about feeling sympathy for Alice. She doesn't know what she's looking for. She's out in terrible weather conditions. So have a think about what level and perhaps what mark out of 20 you would give this. Student B, and this is the whole of student B's response. I think it's because I wanted to show you that this student is able to think about both sides of the coin. So on the one hand, they can see Hartop as cruel, but on the other hand, towards the end, they also talk about, well, how he could also be acting in this way for a reason which might mean that we see him as less cruel. So it says the reader's sympathy is with Alice. This is because she is shouted at. The use of shouted is very powerful because Alice is made to feel small and worthless. This creates a connection between the reader and Alice, which makes the reader feel sympathetic towards Alice. In addition, Alice is walking along in the rain, wind and darkness. This pathetic fallacy makes the reader worried for Alice. The weather seems to foreshadow something bad that may happen. The reader may also think that Hartop is cruel because he has let his daughter walk alone in the bad weather. He doesn't seem to take responsibility for Alice, even though he is her father. When Alice returns to Hartop, he questions what she has said. He repeats only 3 times, which makes Alice feel worthless. The triplet is used for effect and brings focus to how cruel Hartop is. Alice says only because she has had to walk in the rain to collect a bunch of chrysanthemums. Alice maybe thinks that it is cruel for Hartop to make her do this, so she belittles the issue. However, Hartop becomes angry. This could imply that Hartop cannot control his anger, and this appears often. This makes the reader feel more sympathetic towards Alice. It could be argued that Hartop became angry at Alice because his business is failing. So at this point, the student kind of tries to stick up for Hartop. The pink chrysanthemums may not be the only thing he became annoyed at. Maybe he can't afford to lose any flowers, which may explain why he repeated only. He thought that Alice was making the issue smaller than it was. This would suggest that he isn't hard or cruel, but he is upset and has been keeping a secret from the rest of the family. However, it is far more convincing to suggest that he is angry, and this has happened many times before. Alice obeyed Hartop, which could imply that this has happened before, and if she doesn't comply with his orders, something worse happens. She also left without a word, which is further evidence to suggest that this is a regular occurrence. Overall, I think that Hartop is cruel and hard, and he lets out his emotions on Alice. This then makes Alice feel worthless and small, so the reader's sympathy lies with Alice. So that's the whole response. And the reason I showed you the whole response is because they have tried very hard here to think about both sides of the argument. Is Hartop cruel? Alternatively, what could be used to prove that he maybe isn't cruel? He's talking in this way for a reason. They've talked about lots of quotes there. They haven't really used many methods, though. They haven't talked about interrogatives or adjectives or things. So have a think about what you would give student B out of 20. Student C, this is the whole response to student C. I agree that Alice was treated cruelly. The writer uses the rain to make us feel sorrow for Alice. Rain on her lashes transformed into sudden stars. The writer also creates sympathy by the way her father shouts at her. In the rain and the darkness, all she could see was the tail light. This makes the reader feel sorry for her because she has been left on a dark road in the rain. So a much shorter response there. Think about what this got out of 20. What level? 1, 2, 3, or 4. And finally, student D. This is part of student D's response. The writer portrays Alice as treated cruelly by Hartop, creating sympathy for her through the use of pathetic fallacy. The writer personifies the wind, which seemed to veer and smash her with rain. The vehement connotations of the verb veer and smash create a sense of physical abuse and persecution, and hence the weather is not only used to create a tone of melancholy and hardship, but also perhaps to present Hartop and the way he treats Alice. Moreover, the juxtaposition between the rain and darkness to which Alice is exposed, creating a sense of her vulnerability and victimhood, and how Hartop is shouted within the van, reiterates his privilege and how he takes advantage of this to exploit Alice and treat her cruelly. The use of pathetic fallacy by the writer creates a power dynamic between Alice and Hartop that conveys how hard and cruel Hartop is, and this intensifies our sympathy for Alice. So that's only, I think, a third of their response. So this is what student D wrote. Nice quotes, some nice words in there, some nice analysis coming through. So think about what this got out of students, think what this got out of 20. So you can now pause this video and obviously go back to the 3 other students and have a go at placing what you think this got out of 20. You might also want to write down perhaps a table and write down, what each student did in terms of the language devices, what they said in terms of the effects and so on, the quotes that they used, or alternatively you could carry on watching for the answers. Okay, so this is what each of those students received from the exam board. So this wasn't me marking, this was the exam board marking. So this is AQA's own work here. So student A sits within level 2, some attempt, 8 out of 20. Again, if you are looking to get, I suppose, a grade 4, if you were able to get a level 2, not the end of the world, quite good, better than nothing for question 4. So if you are just wanting to get, maybe you're a post-16 retake student, resitting English, or maybe you are wanting just a grade 4, that student A is perfect for that, really. That would be kind of half marks, approximately half marks. So that would be something to aim for if you are looking for a grade 4. Alternatively, student B would also be something to aim for. Level 3, kind of mid-level 3, relevant and clear. That was the one where they were talking about it could mean this, but it could also mean this. But notice as well, and this is very interesting, that student B spent half of their response really working very hard to talk about he could not be seen as cruel because of this, and trying to stick up for Hartop. But notice, even though they've tried to convey both sides of the argument, they've only got 13. So I think the thing to learn from this is that even if you work very, very hard and try and talk about both sides of the argument, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get full marks. Because student D, for example, did just talk about how Hartop was cruel, and they got full marks. So I think in 20 minutes, don't try and give yourself too much to do. Don't try and, don't believe that you have the obligation to talk about both sides of the argument. You don't have to. And I think student B there is an example of this. They work very hard to say he isn't cruel, or reasons why he might not be seen as cruel, but yet they weren't really given many more marks than student A. So don't feel you have to talk about both sides of the debate. Student C, as you might expect, much shorter, not as analytical, simple, limited, still okay, 4 out of 20, so got the top end of level 1 actually. So better than nothing, obviously, but is simple and limited. And student D there, wow, did really well, 20 out of 20, full marks. perceptive and detailed, and you might tell that from the way in which that student writes. You can tell that they've got a confidence with their analysis, a confidence with how they are talking about the text. They, take it to task. They take the question by the horns, and they really, show the examiner what they can do with it. So if you're looking for the grade 8 or 9, then obviously student D is the model for you there. So that concludes then this session. So what you can now do is you can go back and have a look at those 4 exemplar answers if you want to. Now that you know what they got from the exam board, you can highlight them, annotate them. If you're doing this in a lesson, you might want to kind of peer assess or highlight together. But importantly, what I might get my students to do at this point, now that we've spent a good half hour or so discussing this extract and discussing the task and showing you 4 examples, is I would get students to probably write their own response. Now that they have really seen the extract being annotated, they've understood the task, and they've seen 4 examples of how to put it all together in a response. So you could also use this video to have a go at writing your own response perhaps, or to use it as a guide. But obviously try not to copy the student exemplar responses. You might, for example, want to go back to a particular student, A, B, C, or D, look at one in particular, for example, student B, and use that on the screen, but have a go at maybe not copying it, but paraphrasing it maybe into your own work, just to get you practicing question 4 and this idea of evaluation. Okay, so in summary then, for question 4, 20 minutes, 20 marks, you need to make sure you're talking about writer's methods, you need to make sure that you're quoting, and you need to make sure that you have understood the focus of the task and really expand on why the evidence that you have selected proves that that task is in fact accurate. Thank you.